Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to start talking about something known as the Cold War, which is not really a war, but kind of a war, but not really a war, but kind of a war. And it's a little confusing, but don't worry. I think you'll get a good grasp on it once we get going. So, World War II is ended. So, Nazis have been defeated. Hitler's dead. We've defeated Japan by dropping the atomic bombs. And you think everything would be all good, but unfortunately, it's not going to be. We basically go straight from World War II into what's called the Cold War. So, let's see what that's all about. So, the issue here is one of our friends during World War II was the Soviet Union. They were the group that the Germans had struggled so much against, and really the country that really helped defeat Germany, perhaps more than any others, including us during World War II. But the Soviet Union was very, very different from the United States. Like the only reason we were probably with them during World War II, and not probably for sure, because we really didn't like each other, but we both knew that the Germans, because they were Nazis at the time, were even worse. So we just kind of joined together. And the problem is the Soviet Union is what we call communist. And we're going to learn about that word a little bit more. But they wanted to spread their communism to other countries. And we were very, very against that. And we were going to do whatever we could to stop that. So we really didn't get along. So Soviet Union wanted to spread communism, and the United States wanted to stop the spread of communism. So this is going to lead to a lot of tension. Tension meaning like we come really close to fighting, we don't get along, but we never actually fight each other. So the Cold War is this war of ideas between the United States and the Soviet Union. Our beliefs are so different from each other that we can't just put those to the side and get along. And that's going to lead to problems basically from 1945 when World War II ends until about 1990, 1991. So like 45, 46 years. So this time period from 1945 to 1990-ish is that a lot of your grandparents, if you're a fifth grader watching this, probably grew up during this time. And your parents were probably born toward the end of this time. Me included. I was born toward the very end of the Cold War. So the United States and Soviet Union never actually go to war with one another. But within this Cold War, you'll find out that there are lots of little mini wars. We call them hot spots or proxy wars, where we do fight, but never directly against the Soviet Union. And they do go to some wars too, but never directly against us. It's a little confusing. And this is because we have, again, it's a war of ideas, very different ideologies. And that's a big fancy word, but if you look at it, ideology is really just a fancy way of saying ideas. It's a set of beliefs that form the basis for a political, that's your governments, an economic, that's your money system, or any other system. It's basically how we believe a country should be run. So let's look at the United States real quick. The United States believes in capitalism, which is private ownerships of goods and production. Goods meaning things that are made. Anything that you could buy or sell is a good. A shoe is a good. A football is a good. A piece of fruit is considered a good. And production, meaning how things are made. Cabinets being made in a factory are production. Shoes being made, production. And the idea in capitalism is the people own it. The people own the products, they own the factories, they own the stores, and it's what's called a free market, meaning store owners set their own prices. So if you owned a store or you owned a restaurant, you would decide how much you were going to sell shoes for, or nails, or pancakes, or whatever your product is. And you would decide that price based upon what you think people would be able to pay or would be willing to pay. So, for example, if you had the best pancakes in town, maybe you can get away with charging $20 for a few pancakes. But most people aren't going to buy $20 pancakes unless they are super, super good. So it might be smarter to sell your pancakes for maybe $10 or $5. And that's how the prices are decided. Uh, Basically, the more in demand something is, the more people want it, the higher the price is going to be, because the store owners will know you're going to pay for it. And the factory owners decide what they make. If you own a factory, you could decide if you want to make shoes, or if you want to make cell phones, or if you want to make shirts, whatever. And the farmers decide what they want to grow. If you want to grow corn, you grow corn. If you want to grow tomatoes, you grow tomatoes. And the goal here is you're trying to make a profit. And this should sound familiar, because this is how the United States works today. Everyone's trying to make a profit. Profit means that it's money that you keep. You keep what you make, and you don't have to share it. If you own a store, you sell things, you keep that money. Yes, you're going to pay some taxes on it, but the goal is for you to keep as much as that as you can, and then you can spend that how you want. The idea is freedom in the free market. You decide, the people make those decisions for the most part. That's how the United States runs, and that's very different from how the Soviet Union ran its country. Let's look at that. The Soviet Union believed in what's called communism, where the government owned goods and production. So now think about this for a second. The government owned the products, the factories, and the stores, meaning the government would set the prices in the stores based on what they believe people will be able to pay. So the government would technically own a store. If you couldn't own a store or a factory, you'd just be somebody the government told to run it. But you wouldn't decide what the prices were on your shoes or your nails or whatever product you want to sell. The government would tell you how much those were going to be sold for. And the government would decide what factories are going to make. They'd say, all right, in this place, we'll have this factory be shoes. And in this place, this factory is going to make basketballs. In this place, this factory is going to make computer parts. And they would decide all that. And they'd decide what farmers were going to grow. This area is going to grow corn. This area is going to grow potatoes, and so on. And the idea is the wealth is shared among the people. Nobody should be rich, yet nobody should be poor. Everything's owned by the government, and then they distribute it out to the people. And the idea is that way it's more fair for everyone. That's very different for the United States. For the United States idea was you work hard, you make money, and then you get to keep that money. The Soviet Union's plan was everybody should be treated equally. And again, this is a very simplified version of this, but that's the basic idea of the plan. Now, there's lots of problems with both systems, really. But again, on the simplest level, this is what it meant. In the United States, we believed very strongly, and still do, in capitalism. And the Soviet Union believed very strongly in communism. And we really, really, because the systems are so different, could not get along with each other. And the reason it becomes so heated, and the reason we can't just ignore the other one, is because we become the two most powerful countries in the world after World War II. It's not even close. The United States and the Soviet Union are so much more powerful than everybody else at this point in time. That's because we're the two most powerful, we're gonna butt heads. Think of this as like the two biggest, strongest kids in the school, and we completely don't like each other. Chances are bad things are gonna happen. So the reason it happens like this is because if you look at Europe before World War II, there was a lot of different countries, but every little different outline here is a different country, but they all were independent and running themselves. Well, during World War II, remember Germany, everything in red here was taken over by Germany. And Germany controls all of it. And then the Soviet Union is going to come from this direction over to the east and take over all of this on their way to get to Germany to try to take out Hitler. And the United States and Britain are going to head from this direction and take over all of this, trying to get to Hitler right here. Well, as you can see, there's more countries over here on this side where the Soviet Union is going to take over. And after World War II, we kind of split right here. You see all the countries in red after World War II? Those are going to be allied or with the Soviet Union. And all the ones in blue here are with the United States. The only two that are kind of oddly placed are right here, Greece and Turkey, because they're kind of our friends. But everything else, it's East versus West. And because the Soviet Union spread their ideas of communism to all of these countries, that makes us scared a little bit. We don't want it to spread anywhere else. Basically, you see this imaginary line right here dividing the East from the West? We called this the Iron Curtain. A curtain is like something that covers a window or your shower, and iron is a strong type of metal. So it was invisible. There was no real line separating these places. But it's basically this idea that there's a big division between the East, all of this, and the West over here. Communism over here, capitalism over here. Very different. And this leads to what's called the Truman Doctrine in 1947. Shortly after World War II, our president, Harry Truman, this guy right here, comes up with this idea of containment. It means that we're going to keep communism from spreading. We're going to contain it, keep it in. If you think of like a fence is meant to contain something. If you build a fence in your backyard, it might be to contain your dog to just your yard, or your little brother or little sister or whatever. If you have a dog in a backyard and a fence, it can run all through that yard. It can do it once in there, but it can't spread any further. And we decide by 1947, whatever countries are already communist, they can stay communist, that's fine, it's whatever, but it will not spread any further. And how are we going to keep more countries from becoming communist? We're going to give aid to them. We're going to give money to them, products, help, however it is. And as a last resort, we will use what's called military intervention, which is a fancy way of saying war if necessary. If the Soviet Union is trying to take over a country or trying to turn them communist, we promise the world we will go to war to stop that from happening. We basically say we will not let one more inch of territory become communist without trying to stop it. And that's going to lead to a lot of the problems that we're going to face over the next 45 years. Because the Soviet Union, again, wants to spread communism, and we want to stop it. One of the ways that we try to stop it, and this is going to be our last thing we're looking at today, is what's called the Marshall Plan. And this was named for our Secretary of State, which is a high-up position in our government, somebody who's real close to the president, called George Marshall. And we gave about $13 billion to Western Europe. That is this part of Europe, to help them rebuild after World War II. Because remember, World War II destroyed a lot of Europe because of all the fighting and all the bombing. And we give them all this money because we know that if we can help rebuild them, they'll be on our side instead of turning to communism. Because think about it. Communism, if the idea is to spread the wealth among everybody evenly in a country, if you're really poor, that sounds really good. Whereas if you have a lot of money, that sounds really bad. Because if you have a lot of money, you don't want to share it with people, do you? Whereas if you don't have a lot of money, you want the rich people to share it with you. So we decide that if we just keep Western Europe from becoming really poor, they won't want to become communist. Now, tomorrow, you're going to learn about what happens in Germany. Remember, the country that basically starts World War II, they're going to get divided up into East Germany, controlled by the Soviet Union, and West Germany, controlled by the United States and Great Britain and France. And this is going to lead to some problems, especially in the city of Berlin, as you'll find out, the main capital city of Germany, because it is going to be, while it's over here all the way, if you look at my mouse on the computer, it's all the way over here in East Germany, all the way on the Soviet Union side, yet we control part of it, which is really confusing, and it's going to lead to a lot of problems, which you're going to read about tomorrow, something called the Berlin Airlift. So I hope that is a good introduction to the war. Remember, the big difference is the United States has capitalism, where it's about freedom and people own their own stuff. And the Soviet Union is communism, where the government owns things and tries to spread the wealth among the people. Soviet Union wants to spread communism. We want to stop the spread of communism. And that is going to be the basic theme for basically the entire Cold War.